Thanks for tuning in to RTD News Updates. And today's articles have to do with negative interest rates and the consequences thereof. So I've kind of put together a lot of articles that have to do with, the concept of NIRP and the consequences that NIRP policies has implemented on various countries around the world. And like always, if you find this to be informative, I want you to share this information to get it out there to help other people become more monetarily aware of what's going on around them, as well as subscribe to be in tune for the next episode, which will be here tomorrow. So let's start off first one with Bloomberg. And so this has to do kind of like a follow-up to Janet Yellen's speech last week, where Fed Fischer says negative rates seem to work in today's world. And so that statement right there seems kind of odd, that there's consequences happening all over the world, predominantly a lot of people withdrawing their funds and hoarding cash and things like that. But yet he said it seems to work. So typical central bank spiel. But it says here, Federal Reserve Chairman Stanley Fischer said negative rates seem to be working in other countries, while reinforcing that they aren't on the table in the U.S. Oh, really? That's interesting. They've seen it work for other countries, but yet they haven't considered them here yet. Make you wonder. While the Fed isn't planning to do anything in that direction, the central banks using them basically think they're quite successful, Fischer said on Tuesday on Bloomberg television. And then one thing that really caught my eye has to do with right here. It says, "We're in a world where they seem to work," referring to negative interest rates, Fischer said. Noting that while negative rates are difficult to deal with for savers, they typically go along with quite decent equity prices. So in other words, never mind the citizens, never mind those who entrust that their currency and their national currency will retain some form of purchasing power. Never mind that. Let's focus more so on the equity prices. So, more spiel from here. It goes on to talk about how boosting inflation will ultimately be a lot of policies implemented by several other European Central Bank, Bank of Japan. So it goes on just to talk about, how 2% is the mandate of the Fed, and how they are kind of reaching that target there, and full employment is one of their mandates as well. And so basically looking ahead as far as the next rate hike, he's saying that everything is data dependent, and right now the data, isn't quite there yet, but it's looking promising. So more spiel from them guys, but I thought it was an interesting article just because he mentions that, or he agrees with, or telling the public that negative rates seem to be working in other countries, but yet the Fed themselves haven't really given much thought here. So definitely an article worth checking out if you're interested. More central bank spiel. Moving from the topic of Fed Fischer's idea that NIRP is working, is John Malden at Malden Economics, and he actually talks about 6 ways NIRP is economically negative. And so here he lists, he goes on, starts off talking about the idea of liquidity, and how interest rates play a major part in just basically setting the tone, or not the tone rather, but just establishing the the structure and the pricing for liquidity for the markets. And so since 2008, he basically says that monetary policymakers have basically, in a way to try to correct their own errors, have actually abused the price of money drastically by basically dropping down to zero, of which he said he kind of sort of agreed with temporarily, but yet they've over greased the market and stayed in that zero range too long, to the point where it didn't work. So now they had to resort, or a majority of the countries or central banks have to resort to negative. And so here's the first one here, and it says the idea of NIRP problem number 1. It fails to stimulate. The whole idea in going to zero was to promote growth, but yet now that they're in negative, they've come, he's come to the realization that it does not work. There's no way possible to stimulate growth with negative interest rates, because it defeats the purpose, and people trying to save and use the savings to loan out to stimulate growth. And so number 2, it talks about betraying Lord Keynes. And so he talks about, and he actually lists a book here of some things that he agrees with Keynes for a moment more so. But it basically says that even the central banks that follow Keynes or Keynesianism, or however you pronounce it, his model of central banking, he himself would kind of be embarrassed at what's going on now, because they've kind of distorted his his school of thought, or whatever you want to call it. So they basically said the central banks now are betraying the founder of the concepts that they thought they were implementing. So quite funny there. And he goes on to give more information about some of his policies and things like that. It's quite a lengthy article here. The third one is policy paralysis. And so basically, because of the central bank policy, it's nowhere, no real safe place to put your money. So people are kind of caught in between. It mentions here about typical investments will be treasuries, but yet now the S&P dividend yield is currently around 2%. So to earn it, you have to accept the principal risk and volatility inherent in stocks. So people, for most part now, because there's no real way to earn interest on anything nowadays, people have to gamble more so with the stock market. Next one. And then NIRP problem is it's killing insurance companies and pension funds softly. And so he goes on to include himself in this, and how pension fund was meant to generate profits from long-term loans to grow the money they need, along with contributions, whatever. And then it talks about basically now, because bonds, which is what these type of pensions and insurance usually have depended upon, they can no longer function properly. So basically, they're at risk of trying to manipulate and figure out new ways of making profit, which comes with laying off people, downsizing certain things, and cutting back costs or whatnot, just to try to squeak out a little bit of profit to pay the promises that they have to retirees or whatnot, that they'll be able to receive. He said, I think here, about at least 5% of their total portfolio. So, and he's saying that not long ago that was common, but speaking to the younger generation, that's not going to be possible for those guys. And so it was the next one, number 5, distorting signals. What is this? That's about talk about the ECB and how their verbal communication to the markets kind of throws things off, to where they promised this, like it says here, Mario Draghi promises to do whatever it takes for the ECB, and then you got the Bank of Japan, Carnegie, or not Carnegie, but I forgot his name right now. But anyway, how he's verbally, commenting on things and stuff. So just a speech in general hurts the markets. Last one, repressing retirees. And so those that are retiring dependent upon money, which are people who have saved, worked hard all their life, they're being killed, and they will be killed monetarily in the days ahead, because there's no way of unraveling this negative interest rate policy. So good article, quite lengthy here. Hope I did a good job of summarizing it for you. If you're interested, definitely go into it and pull out more details for yourself. As a consequence of negative interest rates, this article here from Armstrong Economics, Hoarding Cash, Prelude to the Crash and Burn. And so it's a short article, and it basically shows here a Swiss franc, 1,000 Swiss franc note. And he talks about how over the last, couple years, pretty much since 2011-ish, the concept of hoarding cash has become very, a very, mainstream media topic. In Switzerland, ever since they went negative there, he said that they printed 41.6 billion in Swiss francs now in circulation in 1,000 notes. And so people have basically withdrawn their money from the bank there and began hoarding them. And so he's saying the safes, the purchase of private, small safes for homes have skyrocketed, because people figure it's better to hold their money at home than actually to keep it in the bank, where it earns nothing. And so it goes on to talk about in Japan, they're printing 10,000 yen notes like crazy. And they said even Americans began hoarding cash back in 2011, which began to make news by 2014. In fact, 43% of Americans keep their savings in cash these days for interest pays nothing. Yet an amazing 53% of those cash hoarders plan to hide bills in a secret location at home. So basically just, the consequences, once again, of negative interest rates. You earn nothing, but yet you risk everything. So people decide to get, the big bills and hold them at home. So another article worth checking out if you're interested. Here's an article here from the teaparty.org that has more to do with the idea of stashing cash. And it's from Wall Street Journal, but it says German savers lose faith in banks, stash cash at home. So this article originally appeared in Wall Street Journal, but yet to be able to access the entire article, I clicked and went somewhere else to read it. But basically, it just talks about just some of the mindset of a lot of Germans, and it goes into detail about some of the individual banks there that are actually charging, small commercial banks now that are charging at least 0.04% on deposits over 100,000 euros. And so it basically says here, for years, Germans kept socking money away in savings accounts despite plunging interest rates. Savers deemed the accounts secure, and they still offered easy access to cash. But recently, many have lost faith. And here quoted somebody saying, it doesn't pay to keep money in the bank, and on top of that, you're being taxed on it, said Uwe Weiss, an 82-year-old pensioner who recently bought a home safe to stash roughly $59,344, including part of his company pension that he took a payout on. And then more quote here says, Birch, such and such, Germany's biggest safe manufacturer, posted a 25% jump in sales of home safes in the first half of this year compared with the earlier years. Rivals, Format, something another, also reported double-digit percent German sales increase. So business is doing very well for safe manufacturers in the German area. It says safe manufacturers are operating near their limits. Germans point to the European Central Bank, which since 2004 has tried to reignite Eurozone inflation by pushing interest rates below zero. Savers now face the prospect of being charged fees on their deposits. Some companies and large private depositors already incur charges. And so here, I like this here, it says how as of September 1st, the bank, Raiffeisenbank Mund, I believe I'm pronouncing that, hopefully somewhere near correct, will charge its customers 0.4% on deposits above 100,000. Some 140 customers with total deposits worth 40 million euros are affected, said management board member Jose Paul. So just more, right home in Germany, right down to the smallest person depositor there, are all concerned with negative interest rates and the idea that the typical model of storing your money in a bank no longer is worthwhile. So people are becoming their own banks. And so, more information here to read if you're interested. Definitely a lot of good European experience that Americans here can kind of, gain some knowledge from. Here's another article here posted on the teaparty.org, but originally from Reuters. And it says, global banks send warning Fed to buy corporate debt. And so apparently not long ago, there was a meeting of central bank members, of which the primary topic was how to, overcome, current, environment. And they use Europe, ECB, and Japan as the primary case studies of how policies should and shouldn't work. And so one of the main themes that came from it was the importance for governments to begin implementing more fiscal policies that kind of help the central banking model go along as far as the idea of meeting inflation targets. And so for some reason in this article here, I'm not sure why, but I guess it's just a Keynesianism school of thought, but yet, they actually talk about inflation of prices being a good thing, as if like that's something I want or something that perhaps you want, as far as prices continue to rise or needing to rise for the economy to be healthy. I personally would prefer if prices went down so I can purchase more with the paper that I'm holding on to. But yet, I guess this plays into the whole monetary madness that we're currently in. But yet, it goes throughout the article and it lists just several things that central bank, people are currently working on policy-wise. And then one of the things that stood out, it says one of the central worries is that households and businesses have become so cautious and set in their outlooks, expecting little growth and little inflation, that they do not respond in expected ways to the efforts central banks have made. So basically saying that, people are now becoming cautious. They don't want to spend. They don't want to, get involved in this, monetary illusion that the central banks have created. And it talks about how they, injected all this stimulus into the economy, to kind of, I guess, play mind games with the consumer that everything is good. So go ahead and spend. Go ahead and spend. Don't save. Spend. And so just more madness on, their part to think that everyone out here is stupid. Everyone wants to just spend away and, save nothing for a rainy day or just for their own future. And so just more, monetary stupidity coming from, those that run our monetary system. So, and then it lists here a Princeton University economist who kind of plays into the idea of, um, it requires deficits. He's big on deficits. The government should, borrow more, borrow more, borrow more, and then pump it out with new programs to kind of get people to give the illusion that things are good. So this guy encourages deficits, obviously knowing that deficits, for our government means that it will never be repaid. So it must come to an end at some point in time. But, this is a Princeton, economist. So I guess he must know what he's talking about. So yeah, I'll let you be the judge of that. Article below if you're interested. Here's the last article here, and it's plays right into the idea that NIRP is causing every form of investment to kind of be in question right now. And so it says here from Bloomberg, the biggest wealth fund warns outflows are affecting risk strategy. And so this has to do with the private pension fund in Norway, which is a fund that is, pretty much is oil money. They've taken all their pensions from oil workers and retirees and invested into some oil, which, when the economy was doing good, was making a lot of money as far as oil is concerned, but now they're not. So it says Norway's 180 billion sovereign wealth fund is acknowledging that rising withdrawals by the government could hamper its quest to manage more risk and generate greater returns as it takes on more and more negative yielding securities. So the government, Norway's government is strapped for cash. So the government is coming in and, borrowing probably, or more likely stealing some of this money that's been saved up for retirees in their oil fund there. And so basically, it gives a graph here showing how since 1998, they've been, a little inflow from the government. The bonds that they've invested in have been paying them some money, but now the government's saying, hey, we need some of this money back. And so here, second quarter, a little bit in the negative. So the government's borrowing, from a fund that they had to pay into not long ago from their bonds that the fund purchased. So just more insanity out here in this world when it comes to monetary policy, as well as the government's involvement right along with it. So hope this was informative. Let me know your thoughts below. And also, like I said before, if you're new to the RTD News Update, feel free to subscribe and then share it. I want to help get the word out there just to help people see how monetarily upside down this globe is. Other than that, hope all is well. I'll see you tomorrow.